You have to fail to grow.
Our world gets tiny fast, and we have a lot of people that are not feeling that great right now.
That feels a little bit high up there.
Don't bring home the bottom line. All right, friends, today we have Brandon White on the podcast. His story is one that I read more than once, so I had to convince him to be on here and share it with all of us, along with his book, which is The Business Plan in 11 Slides. I highly recommend it because it will help you get organized, stay focused, and be able to pursue your passion. So, Brandon, thanks for joining us today.
No, Jen, thanks for having me. I'm really grateful.
So your story of success, failure, and resilience, and doing all these different things is a story I think a lot of us quit prematurely. So then we don't get to see it all the way to fruition. And you've had the endurance and all the things in your story to bring it forward. So I want to share that today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Well, first, I want to say that I failed more than I've been successful. So I don't want to come across as somebody who comes out there and says, oh, well, it was all easy and it all worked out and I got a master plan. I did write a book called Back to the Napkin to Business Plan 11 Slides, but and that's a good framework that you can follow to build a plan. And it's one that I've followed mostly because it's changed over the years. But I have definitely failed more than I have been successful. And it's cliche, I think, to say that, Jen, like, oh, well, everybody says fail, fail, fail. But I was trying to write something for my newsletter last weekend and I ditched it because I just couldn't get it right. And I wrote about something else. But, in the gym, and I lift at least 4 days a week, you have to fail to grow. Like it, and it's not talked about the same way as it is, let's just say on that thing called the internet, the interweb. Everybody says these quotes on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook, like, oh, fail. But in the gym, it's actually not just something that people say, it's something that they encourage every single set, because if you don't hit failure, then you don't get the results. And ironically, when you do, I had like one of the best workouts I've had in a really long time the other day for chest and biceps. And like when you hit that failure and you consistently push yourself to fail, it's like you feel so good. You also sleep really well too, Jen.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is when you get into mountaineering, I didn't know this in the beginning, but I thought you started at the base of Everest and then just like it took you forever to get to the top. But you actually have to acclimatize. And when you acclimatize, like you hit a point of failure on the mountain, and then you sit at that point of failure as long as you can. You go back to base camp, and that point of failure triggered your body to physiologically change and produce more red blood cells. So now when you go up the mountain, you can go up higher because now you have more red blood cells to operate in the lower oxygenated environment. And I think so often we forget that failure is on the path to success.
Yeah, I think it's also, as you were talking, because it's an interesting topic, right? People say it all the time, but they don't actually do it. And I think it's so scary to fail because you feel like there's so much negativity around it and you're going to be judged, and you probably will be, but you have to get over that and just get through it, because if you don't get over that, I don't know how you, like, I don't know where life goes. It probably goes in not a good place. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, and I'm sure you've had that same experience. Like sometimes you're going to get scared of failure. You're going to see something, you're going to see that in your case, these mountains, and say, that feels a little bit high up there. I don't know if I'm going to do it. And maybe you kick a can down the road for 2-3 weeks before you make a decision. But if you don't make those decisions, I just don't know what type of, and I'm not judging anybody. Like it's super hard. This is not easy. It does get easier. I don't think it gets easier because I'm on like my 120th, I'm exaggerating, software company that I've tried. And this one actually probably going to work, but it doesn't get easier, but you recognize the feeling so that when you get through it to the other side, that you'll be able to have a framework to deal with it. It's not that it's easy, it's just that you have the skill. Would you agree with that?
No, I like you all of a sudden realize, oh, this doesn't feel good, but this is where this happens in my pursuit. And you realize it's pretty methodical. The unique thing about fear is that it's not very creative or new. It's like, oh, this is fear. Here's how it's going to show up. Here's how it feels in my body. And so I've been here before. So this is what I do in this circumstance. And you
Yeah, I
train
mean,
your body to work with it.
yeah, I think I wrote about this. I might even did a show. I don't remember, but you got to do hard things to do hard things. I mean, one of the biggest people out there who says that stuff is David Goggins, and like love him or hate him, uh, there's some real truth in that sort of stuff. That if you don't do it, you're just not going to build resilience. Sometimes I worry about younger generations right now because it it is very easy to do things that in your and my generation it wasn't as easy, and I think that was good. Like it
Right.
wasn't easy to approach a girl or a boy. Like it was sort of intimidating. It was real life. Whereas it's online, it's like, oh, I see Jen's picture. I'm going to hit her up with an IM. I mean, or a DM. That can be intimidating too. But it is a lot easier. There's no skill in that.
Right, right. And it's not like the person. There's like a layer of protection behind that device at some level. No, I do believe we either are pushing on this like edge of who we are, of the hard things that we're capable of doing, or that's pushing in on us and making our world smaller and smaller and smaller. And so if we don't learn how to push on that edge and keep expanding it and keep growing, our world gets tiny fast. And we have a lot of people that are not feeling that great right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. You're much better at putting in words than me, but it's true. You're going to get smaller. You're not going to get big. You're either growing or shrinking. There's no, you know, some days when I'm like yesterday, I eat Mexican food. I'm like, oh well, I'm on maintenance. No, no, I wasn't. You're not on maintenance. You're probably gaining some weight, but figure it out tomorrow. But there's no neutral. I don't think.
No, neutral is yeah, it's a balancing act that's always moving and it's either forward or backwards. Neutral is not a place you live. It's a place you might stand for a second, but not any further than that.
Yeah, like take a break for a minute, take a breath, but keep going.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this whole business book came out. Why? Like, why did you feel compelled to write it?
Well, that's a good question. I always wanted to write a book. I started writing a book when I was graduated from college on all the things they didn't teach me in college that I was learning from a fire hose. Like, oh, you want to buy a house, you need a down payment. Oh, you didn't save that money. Not that I didn't save that money, but oh, you didn't realize what that goal was going to have to be. Oh, by the way, here's your mortgage payment. Here's your car payment. Oh, you need insurance for that. You didn't compute that. Um, oh, you actually have to put it in a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet actually shows you how to do this, right? And I still have that disc. It ages me a little bit, but and I didn't finish that book. And I always wanted to write a book. My mom wrote 7 books,
Oh,
and
wow.
she was a writer for a newspaper on the East Coast, Baltimore Sun, and some and a regional newspaper. And I thought, well, I want to write a book. And I think the other thing, Jen, that it really came about was I got tired of repeating myself. So I will help anybody. I mean, truth is, a lot of people helped me in my life that did not need, there was no like requirement. There was no financial incentive in a lot of cases to help me. If anything, it was a time suck. um,
Hmm.
but, but they did help me. So if I can do that for people, but repeating yourself gets old. So it was really a challenge. How could I distill how to build a business plan of which I had ironically taught to 1,500 students, and I'm not, for listeners, I'm not selling a course. I am literally giving the course away now for free because I think that people need the course. I teach high school students here in Half Moon Bay. I built this thing called Future Enterprisers, which was from Risky Business. You'll probably remember that. And I think everybody should have that opportunity to do that. So I'm not selling a course, but I wanted to just build a framework, distill it down, and then be able for someone to buy a book for under $20 and basically have a framework to do it. And there's a lot of opinions out there. You know, I've got it down to 11 slides. I was a venture capitalist. I am an angel investor. I've been an entrepreneur much longer than I was a venture capitalist, but I've been on both sides of the table. So I tried to build it in the case, like, even if you wanted to raise money, this would work. And I like the challenge of making things simple. Like, when you build software, I mean, we all know what complicated software is. I mean, complicated software is opening up Microsoft Word and having 50 options up top and not knowing what to do. And then, Google comes along with Google Sheets. And, I'm not saying it's the perfect word processor, but it's simpler. And, it probably has 90% of what you need. So could I do that? And then I tend to be a renegade or a maverick or go against the grain. So everyone said, well, if you want to write a business book, you have to write 60,000 words, is generally what they'll
Right.
coach you on.
Right.
Coach you, coerce you, whatever the right word is. And I was like, so what I did, and I tend to be more of a numbers data person, I went back and looked at all the books that sold 1 million copies in the business self-help topic. Turns out, Jen, that most of those books don't have more than 30,000 words. The ones that sell 1 million copies, not, whether they're on the New York bestseller list or Amazon bestseller, whatever, Wall Street Journal bestseller, if you break it down and you go and look at the ones that really in that category, they're very short. Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know. You could read that in what, an hour, maybe. I mean, you keep going down the list. So I was like, well, okay, let's do that. Let's try to make this the least amount of words I could possibly do. And that turned out to be a really hard thing. I thought I was going to whip this book out in an hour. This is like a really long-winded explanation of why I wrote this book, Jen. But I was like, okay, let's see if we can do it. And I got it down to 22,000 words. And I don't know if we were recording, but before you came on, which I think was a good way to explain it, is it's so simple, it's hard. Not that it's not that it's hard to read. It's super simple. Right. I have all the frameworks. If your problem slide is a person does something, their pain is existing solutions are broken because fill that in. But filling it in, takes a minute. I've tried to make it easy. So I don't know. It was like a personal accomplishment. Everybody, you write a book, and it was a real kick in the ass, if I can say that on this show. Like it was a lot of failure and a lot of frustration, to be quite frank. But I'm doing a whole series. So the whole series is going to be Back of the Napkin 2. The next one's going to be how to do a pitch deck for investors. The one after that, I think I'm going to go back and do that one that I just mentioned to you and listeners, which is the like life book. Like, here's what you really should think about and save everything from saving money. I mean, I'm lucky I'm a saver, so I didn't grow up with a lot of money, but it's a compounding interest is a real thing. Yeah.
On everything we do. Compounding affects everything we do. You climb a mountain because you compound a whole bunch of little steps. You buy a house because you compound your savings. Like I don't think people give the tiny little things we do consistently enough credit.
Well, I think it's because it's too small of a progress and people don't want it. Like, it's very hard as a human to see this little movement and celebrate it. Maybe my wife's a dog trainer, and she's very good. She does dog agility. She's been on 10 world teams, and I only say that probably because I'm her husband and I like to brag about my wife, but she's at the top of her game, and we have a new dog that she has, and she doesn't take off from the right spot all the time, which in that sport, like quarter hundredth of a second matters, and it can add up. So she's like super frustrated, and she teaches dog agility. I mean, she's at the top. She's been the coach of a world team. She's been on 10 world teams. She's taken like a rescue dog we had from 0 to gold medal. And she's like, this thing is just not working. And I was like, look, you need to move, for lack of a better way to explain it, this touch point that she's training the dog on just like half an inch every day. And she's just like losing her mind. Like, she's losing her mind. She's like, this dog isn't going to do it. I'm like, the dog is going to do it, but you're going to have, you don't see the little progress. But when I come out once a week, sometimes I help her set the agility course if she doesn't have help. I can see the progress because I'm seeing those big leaps. But when you're a human in it, doing it, right, you don't see it as much. And I think maybe that's, you need other people around you. I do think you got to have other people around you to recognize that, whether it's a coach or whatever that is, that's going to be able to give you that perspective. Because if you don't, then you become this self-licking ice cream cone, and you basically like eat the ice cream cone and you're gone. Like you said, you start to shrink.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. No, when I was looking at the business plan too that you developed, you give us the framework, but there's still, and it gives you kind of accountability, right? Like I remember building my business, and when anytime I got off track, I got away from the person's problem. And when we get away from the person's problem that we're trying to solve, we get off track. And when I read the book and I had already built a business, I was reflecting back on that business and all the things that didn't work out. And it was as simple as that. I got away from solving the person's problem and got caught up into like something like what the office looked like or what I wanted this to be, or like things that don't bring home the bottom line. And so now that I'm building this new business of speaking and having the book go out and all those different pieces, just always coming home to those simple, basic things keeps you accountable and in line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If you're not touching the customer, you're out of touch. I remember, and I learned this. I learned this in my first company, which we can talk about and how that worked, and being on the ground with no training back then. But also at America Online, when I worked there, we could listen in. When you call customer service, you'll hear this could be recorded for training purposes or blah blah blah. So we could dial in, and it was a really big thing at America Online that everybody would dial into those live customer support calls, because that's where it's happening. That's the customer. That there's no filter through 3 layers of whatever to get to you. It Wherever you sit in management or whatever that is, it's on the front line. So I think you got to definitely stay in touch with the customer. It can be hard because sometimes we get caught up with all these quote unquote business things, titles, recognition that, oh, well, you're the CEO. Like, I don't even call myself CEO anymore. I think that's like CEO of a startup. I mean, come on. I'm like
the janitor, the HR department, customer service, like everything. Yeah.
I'm just like founder. I mean, a CEO of Tesla or GM or Procter and Gamble, like that sounds like a real job. But I'm not minimizing anything because it's hard. But I think that you can get caught up in that in your head, and then your ego and pride. I mean, that's why most companies and most people fail, is because of ego and pride.
Why? What do you attribute most of your failures to?
Because I'm not smart enough to have, I don't know. Most of the stuff that I didn't do right, that's an interesting question, the way you put it, but I think I'm just willing to try things. I'm curious. Um, I do take instruction very well. So if there's a qualified person that I believe, not as if I'm like some judgment person, but you need to be qualified. Like I would listen to you when we climbed a mountain. And be like, hey, Brandon, that's not the route. Here's why. Yeah, I'm going to defer to you and not question it. I might ask a question out of curiosity, but I'm going to roll with the decision. So I tend to do that. So I'm willing to trust the experts in that way. And I think, um, if I'm the smartest person in the room, really, I'm scared. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly will leave because that's just not a good situation. But I think most of the chances um, I've just taken because I'm curious about what's going to happen. And over time, I mean, I had a lot of failure in my life because I have dyslexia. When you're in first grade, you can't read, you can't hear a sound, you can't spell, still can't spell. You, in those moments, like there's no choice. You have to go forward. I mean, at that age, you don't feel that way, but the reality is that you're just going to figure out a way. And I think that, in many ways, having that learning disability really did actually help me. It taught me that if you keep going, and I learned that, like, oh, if I get to the other side of this ridge, that there's easy going for a while, or however, whatever metaphor you want to say. And I think that's what's really given me the framework to do it. And now I'm just not. Uh, I know what to expect, and I recognize the feelings. And maybe because I recognize those feelings so early in my life, that it didn't make it easy, but it kept building on it, and it just sort of overflowed into where I got today.
Yeah, resilience and consistency, and like just to keep going and reiterating, right? Like it's not a failure unless we stop. It's a lesson learned. What do we know now? How do we continue? What's the best way to continue? And then put action behind that and be willing to fail again, because you will. I mean, I have a book coming out and we're already looking at things that we would change for our next edition, because now that it's on paper and going, it's just, I think everything's art. There's always progress and ways to improve upon.
Yeah, I think that if you're not looking at yourself critically like that, then it can be very, like you said, that's the best way, that you're gonna constrict, and you're gonna wind up in not a fun place, right? But what did there was a quote: you can either keep going or quit. They're both as painful. And
Mm-hmm.
there are times though when you should quit. I just wrote about sunk cost yesterday. Like, you do have to be able to evaluate and say, hey, this probably isn't going to be feasible because of things I can't control, and be willing to ditch that. But even that takes risk, right? That you have to be
Yeah.
brave to, and people do that in businesses. They do that in relationships. They do that in everything. And it does take courage to basically be able to do that.
Yeah. And you just hit a word that I like to cover: fun. When we're doing these things that are hard and expanding, how do you keep fun in your life? Because I think those of us that are having fun naturally have more endurance.
I actually think it's fun to torture myself. So I'm not really at my best if, people talk about moderation, Jen. I don't know what your feeling is, but like, I don't, moderation is for people who are scared, in my opinion. I'm not minimizing. Everyone's certainly not built like that. Uh, And that's okay. Like, you're okay if you're not built like that. But, um, I don't, I'm very binary. I'm either going to do it and be all in or not. And in my brain, whether that's like dyslexia somewhere on the spectrum or whatever, I really don't understand why you wouldn't go all in. So that, look, there's times when you do these companies, or you do anything in life, or ride bikes, like ride a century, and you hit a wall. You're like, why am I doing this?
Yes.
You will ask yourself. I mean, I ride my road bike all the time, and there are times when I'm like, oh God, I wish that I would just get that second flat, because I do not have an extra tube, and I will be able to call Yvette and she will come get me. Like, you are going to have those thoughts. The trick is training your mind to get through that, and how you do it, and break it down into just little bite-sized things. Like, when I ride a century, I'm not riding 100 miles, or do a Grand Fondo 125 miles. I'm riding 1 mile 100 times. And if you can think about doing that, but back to the fun part, I think for me, it's just, um, I don't know how to, I don't know that I would describe it as, I would describe it as being authentic to me. And if that's fun, then someone could describe it that way. But I believe in just being authentic to who I am. And to do anything different would be compromising that. And that wouldn't be fun. So I guess by default, it is fun. And I guess that's how I describe it. Just be authentic to yourself. Now, that, maybe we don't have enough time on this show to get to, but, understanding who you really are you know,
Yeah, good
that's
luck.
what you've got to get to. And yeah, but through all of these things, I mean, when I did that first company, which I'm happy to share, like that story, which I wrote about in the book, and I'm happy to talk
Yeah,
about,
let's share it because we've talked about it a
was
few times.
yeah, I mean, it is a continual um, process. So yeah, I started my first company in my spare bedroom in 1996, and it was just dumb luck. The truth is that I had graduated college. I had told everybody. I didn't know what I was going to do, to be completely honest, but there's a lot of pressure when you're in college of people asking you what you're going to do. And my grandfather had a law firm in Baltimore, and it had been around a long time. And I just told everybody I was going to become a lawyer, and they believed it, and it shut everybody up. And I really didn't do anything other than talk about it to get myself there. I had a master's in psychology, and I was really good at it. Not that that doesn't translate over, but I didn't intern at any law practices. I worked on a tree nursery because it was outside and it was fun during the summers to pay for my college. So my mom, as a single mom, sees her son basically in probably her head like, good God, I invested all this time, all this money. Not that that is what moms say, but like, you don't want your child, I imagine, to get off track. So she's like, you need to go back to school. I don't care what you do, but you'll be in a place where you'll figure it out because you'll be in a very rich environment. So I had gone back, get my master's in psychology. And at the time I fished all the time. There was no fishing magazine that did light tackle fly fishing. I thought there was a market for it. There was a market for it. I wanted to publish a magazine. I went to the publisher. The publisher, like very kindly, Jen, told me, like, you have $800 in your bank account. You know nothing about publishing. Um, and he didn't say that. He asked me the questions that
Yeah.
basically led to that. So he was very kind. Like, I walked out of that meeting saying like, oh, that probably won't happen. But I had been a computer programmer, for lack of a better way to put it. I had a VIC-20 and Commodore 64, and I wrote BASIC and played around. I mean, it was early years. And there was the internet all through college I had played around with, was very, very early in the 90s. And I was like, man, I could put a magazine on the internet. What, like, pretty novel idea. And that's what I did, long and short of it. So we built this thing, and in a few months, we got some publicity. And I had never raised money. I raced to go to the library every morning and read. And by the way, we borrowed everything from school. I mean, we ran the whole site from their servers, whether that was, you got to do whatever you got to do. I mean, I think one of the things for me is there's no rules. And sometimes that drives my wife crazy because it's like, well, that's the rule. I'm like, there's no rules. Like, that was made up by a group of people that maybe they weren't smart. Maybe they were influenced by someone. Like, I'm not I'm not saying that I'm going to like go mass murder anybody here. Like, that's an ethical easy issue to decide not to do, but like some stupid rules, like you can't I'm not saying be a rule breaker. I'm just saying the rules were made by someone else. You don't always have to follow them. So we used all the stuff at school, and it worked. And I read one morning in Time Magazine, or it was U.S. News and World Report. I can't remember. I think it was Time. In the left-hand side, in the beginning of the pages, they used to write about new and noteworthy cool things in tech, because tech really wasn't, quote unquote, a thing like it is now. And it had an article about David Filo and Jerry Yang, and said that they had just raised $1.75 million from Sequoia Capital for this phone book, which effectively was what it was hand jammed. It wasn't hand jammed. It was hand done in the beginning. It was literally built out. Like, here's your topic, here are the sites. And that's how it started on Yahoo. And we had used it in those early years. And I was like, man, well, if they can raise money, I can raise money. Like, why not? Seems like, I'm broke.
Right.
I mean, we were building websites, um, and and I was trading stocks, to be quite honest with you, to fund the company. So, not recommending that, but did work anyway. Um, So I see that. I go to the Barnes and Noble bookstore in Annapolis, Maryland, with my now wife. I get a book called How to Write a Business Plan that was longer than, I think it took me like 2 weeks to actually read the book and figure it out, and then even longer to write this 50-page business plan, which is obsolete now, or that method is obsolete. And I write this business plan. I wrote the business plan. I put it in a FedEx and I sent it to Sequoia Capital in Silicon Valley, addressed to Mike Moritz, who had been mentioned in that article, who's a legendary VC now and retired. But I didn't hear anything. So I was like, okay, we put along, we're trading stocks, we're building websites. And I saw an article in the alumni magazine. Guy said he was going to be a VC or investing. I write him, he's interested. And then he comes back to me, weeks go by, and says, hey, I met someone today at lunch I that you should talk to. I didn't tell him your name, but he fishes and he uses your site, and he's a venture capitalist. Can I give him your information? And I was like, yeah, sure. So a few hours later, I get an email. It's like, hey, this is Tom. I was a general partner, just retired from Sequoia Capital. You might know us. We did Yahoo, Cisco, Apple, and some other companies. Now, Jen, I lived in Easton, Maryland, in a house my wife and I bought for $108,000 and may have been sitting on a box because I didn't have enough money for a chair. So and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I did build the desk. When you get an email like that, you don't really believe that,
Right.
right? So I mailed him back. I'm like, hey, thanks so much. Attaches his business plan. If you have any questions, let me know. Love to see you. And he said, oh, I'd like to come tomorrow. I was like, here's the address. And I like, it could be like some scam that you hear on, you get an email from these people. Oh, I'm a prince of somebody and I've got $100 million for you, Jen. If you could just give me your bank account. I mean, that's what you're thinking when you're this
Right.
kid
Right.
sitting in this spare bedroom. Next morning, knocked on the door. I was like, oh man. Came in the door. We started talking. It's like, oh, cool. Well, let's go to your office. And I just turned around and started walking upstairs. And I could see his face go from like very cordial and nice to confused a little bit. But he followed me up the stairs and we went in the spare bedroom and he didn't say anything. And the spare bedroom was turned into an office and he didn't say anything, but he looked around and he's sort of looking around and then he looks at me. He's like, is this all you got? And at that point, you could imagine, I mean, this person represents a lot of things to an entrepreneur in your head. I mean, Sequoia Capital is arguably, and some VCs will hear this and argue. And look, there's a lot of great VCs that have done a lot of great things, but Sequoia is at the top of the list of like one of the best in the world. Let's just all agree with that. And this guy is one of the original partners sitting in your spare bedroom and says something like that to you. You're not really sure how to respond to that. So all I said was, hey, look, my partner has a spare bedroom down the road that we could go to. And if you came here looking for more, I am completely sorry. I apologize for not like tuning you in that we didn't have some. And I had never been to Silicon Valley. I grew up in Maryland at the time, like that California, where I now ironically live, was a world away. So I had no
Right.
idea what that was. And it's like, calm down, kid. This is how we found Cisco. And, when someone says that to you, you're sort of like, oh man, like this guy was there for that. Like
Mm-hmm.
literally there. And he said, I've been using your site. I'm a fisherman. You look a lot bigger. And I was like, well, I set up the phone system and did all that sort of stuff. Long and short of it, we go to lunch. He turns over the placemat. And this is really the inspiration where this simple business plan, the lesson came to me because I had sent him this 50-page business plan that was basically obsolete. Ironically, like they still taught me that in business school, which I think I probably need to contact them and go back there and teach that in a simpler form. But anyway, turns over the placemat and he writes down on the placemat 4 things. People, I'm looking in my book right now. It's people, finance, market, and financing. And that's the 4 things. He wrote it down on the back of the placemat. And he's like, let's talk about this. And we filled that out over lunch. And then things seemed to be going good. I mean, had a conversation, sort of had the answers, not all of them, but I did know my market. I knew my avatar. It was a saltwater fisherman. I mean, it was very clear to me who that was. And I was like, hey, do you want to go fishing? He's like, yeah. So I went back, hooked up my boat, went to the boat ramp, went out, started catching fish. On the way back, and we had a good day. I actually have a picture of that day in the book, which I sent to Tom because I've been friends with him for over like 25 years. No, 25, 22 years now. And he says, well, how much money do you have? I was like, I really don't know. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, we trade stocks to fund the company. We were building websites, but like the convincing people in 1998, 99 to build a website was just, they're like,
Not happening. Yeah.
yeah, why do I need a website? Like, what is that? I heard about this internet thing, but it's not a necessity. I'm going to advertise in the whatever
Yellow
magazine
pages.
or yeah, right. Yellow pages.
Yellow
Um,
pages.
and he's like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, oh, well, my partner and I trade with the money and he says the company money. I was like, well, the company's mine. So yeah, with the company money. He didn't say anything. He just driving, and I'm driving down a major highway towing a 21-foot boat with a truck and sort of trying to pay attention to the road. And I see him doing something. He hands me over a check, and it's $50,000. And he's like, let's go. No paperwork, no anything. And that's really how my entrepreneur journey, as it relates to getting some edges and raising money and all that, happened. And we raised $1 million from some very high profile people after that. And but long and short of it is that the market crashed in 2001. Some people listening to this, your listeners, probably won't be old enough to remember what happened in 2001, but there was this thing called the dot-com crash, and everybody thought the internet was going away. Literally thought the internet was going away. And me and my either stupidity, resilience, luck.
Contrarian brain.
Like I seem to have a yeah, exactly. That might be a better way. And some guardian angel that I believe like flies around and like swoops in every once in a while for me. I buy the company. We got in a lawsuit because of an employee, which was another lesson for another day. And I bought the company back from the investors, renamed it, and basically had it cash flow positive in 3 months. And then I ran it full time for a minute. I went back to business school. I then became a venture capitalist. I worked for 2 VC firms and I worked at America Online. I ran it as a side hustle. I had some contractors and I really figured out ways to run a 200,000 person site or visitor site with very small staff. And I think that all comes around like just doing what you have to do, right? I mean, we're all given a certain amount of skills and natural ability in our life. You got to figure out how to make the most of that. And that's what I was doing, basically figuring out how to make the most of the situation with not a lot of money at the time, or not a lot of money to like go hire 10 staff again. I think at the time we had 22 or 22 people when we were at our peak, but I ran it as a side hustle, went to business school, did those things, what I had mentioned, worked at venture capital firms and AOL. And then I was like, I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to dedicate, I'm going to build a business plan for 5 years and sell this thing and get an exit. Because for me, the exit was sort of a goal. I'm not saying that you should always do that because it's really anticlimactic once you get there. I mean, the money is nice for sure, but the money doesn't always replace purpose. But nonetheless, I wanted to do that. I also had I was seeing that fishing in the Chesapeake Bay was declining, and my site required good fishing. I mean, people go there because saltwater fish move every day, and they were talking on the forums and all of that sort of stuff. And we were selling merchandise and memberships and all these things. We had 3 lines of revenue there. For listeners who might be curious, we had membership, We had advertising, we had merchandise, and meaning clothing, lures, things like that. And with the declining thing, I was like, my market's going to go away, or it's not going to be as strong. And if that happens, I'm not going to be good for business. So anyway, the other lesson that I should roll back a little bit on, because you and I talked about this on avatars and knowing your market and knowing who your customer is when I started the company, it was called Worldwide Angler. Well, it was called Chesapeake Angler. Then I thought I wanted to be huge, be this big media company. I built it into Worldwide Angler, which covered the entire United States and 3 or 4 international destinations. But when I bought it back, I realized that the mistake I made was I grew too fast and tried to be too many things. And
Mm-hmm.
my theory was that if I could just own my market and no one could get that market, that eventually a roll up strategy, of which I had because I had done that and bought some other sites, but we had diluted ourselves, is basically what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
If the .com crash didn't happen and we had been able to raise more money, it would have been, maybe we would have lived through it and sort of limped our way and figured our way out. But without more financing, it wasn't going to happen. But then once I became that niche and owned the Mid-Atlantic fishing saltwater region, I owned something, a market that was very, very, very hard to get into. And that really helped me. So I went back, I did this 5-year plan. I went back full time, said, here's exactly what we're going to do. Here's how I'm going to do it. And in year 4, someone called and made an offer eventually after some negotiation that, it was a no brainer. And that changed my entire life. I mean, I got to pay off my student debt. I bought a house here in Half Moon Bay. Um, my wife and I, between us, we had 5. Well, we had both went to college, so and I had 2 masters, and Yvette had 1. So that's whatever. It's 5 like pieces of debt from all the school, and it just changed it changed our life. So that's what we did. But that took a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of people, Jen, in 2001 saying you are absolutely insane. Like, the internet is dying. There is no money. Like, just ditch it and go get a career doing whatever you're going to do. And I didn't do that. And there was a lot of naysayers along the way. And there's a lot, as you know, and from online media, there's a lot of nasty people out there that when they don't have to put their real name to a screen name are going to be really mean to you, hurt people. So it wasn't, and look, the positives of what I did far outweigh any negatives, just so I think human nature, you remember these negative people. But I only say that because it wasn't easy. I mean, I went to business school, worked at a VC firm, and ran a site on the side. Like, and had maintained a relationship that survived. Like,
Right.
not for the faint of heart, but it was worth it. And that's my story. And that's really, I think the thing that did for me as a in my entrepreneur business life was to say, hey, look, you actually can start something in your spare bedroom. You can grow it and you can actually sell it for real money. That
Yeah.
is a thing. And when I did it the second time, it was not any easier and it wasn't as big of a win. Make no mistake, it was more of a save than it was a win. But and that company's doing really well now, but for the new owners, but I could recognize all the steps. Like, it
Yeah.
didn't make it easier, but I had seen it before, right? It's
Yep.
like you climbing when you summited that third mountain and you encountered something on the trail on the way up. You're Doesn't make it easy, but you've seen it before,
Yeah.
so you can get to the top. And I think that's what it did for me. But for anybody listening, you have to get through that hard part. Like, and when you do, it's just like, first of all, there's not a lot of people on the other side. Um,
Right.
but the
Right. Right.
people you are hanging out with are pretty cool
Your people.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
What they
Yeah.
say, sit with warriors, the conversation's different.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No, it's
So,
such a fascinating story, and I appreciate you sharing it with the audience because there's so many little nuggets that they can take based on where they're in their journey. They're going to hear it differently, and they're going to see themselves in that, and hopefully have the courage to continue and the wherewithal to say, okay, this might look different than I expected. This might show up a little bit sideways or different ways, but there's still ways if I have the passion or the vision to carry it forward, and just being able to continue on that path. So thank you. And we have
Yeah,
the
you're
book, right, that we just talked about. So where do people get to find you and learn more and get the business plan and figure out when the next books are coming out and all that good stuff?
Yeah, the best place is my personal website, just brandoncwhite.com. The name of the book, which you can search on Amazon, is Back of the Napkin to Business Plan in 11 Slides. I think there's already a preview of the next book on there too. But yeah, and if you search Brandon White, yeah, just go to brandoncwhite.com. You'll get everything you need. I appreciate it, Jen.
Yeah, no, thank you for your time today.